No, hey everyone, it's Mike Kenny, Executive Director, Warrior Assistant, and this is the second webinar in the series, Amy Schoenhoff, Foundations of Mindfulness. This is webinar 2, Awareness of Breath and Perception and Conditioning. So for those that were with us last week, it's a continuation. We're building on the skills that Amy has provided us. And I'll speak for myself. I think this is fantastic because it's great to have that foundation in mindfulness. So we're learning from a pro in Amy Schoenhoff, Mindfulness in the Heartland. So she's I'll say a prominent fixture in the Warrior Ascent program. And we're glad to have her doing these webinars for us as well. So just some basic ground rules. We've got Greg and Mike. This looks like it's going to be a pretty small group. You know, we've had 15, 20, and if everyone's talking over one another, it can get really noisy. So we kind of, you know, I'll say not dissuade, but you know, we were like, hey, let's interact via the questions and the chat. But it seems to me that this being such a small group, hey, if you want to ask questions directly to Amy via your mic, you know, please feel free to do so. This is going to be a little bit more intimate. So with that, let me just unmute everybody just to make sure. And I will hand things over to Amy. She can introduce herself again and what it is that she's going to speak to during this webinar. And there you have it. So with that, Amy, I'm going to change presenters. I'm going to give you the con and leave it in your able hands.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to find out is the gentlemen that are here this evening, were you here last week for last week's webinar?
Hello, everyone. This is Greg, and yes, this is my third visit with you.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you, Greg.
Yeah, this is Mike Park.
And the other, you were here last week as well. Okay.
Yes.
It looks like we've had one more person join us. Could the third person on the call let us know if they were here last week, or whoever was here last week? All right, well, let me ask you this. So at the end of last week, there were two kind of, I wouldn't call them homework assignments, but requests that I made in terms of things to work on over this week that has just transpired. One was practicing with the body scan, and the other was identifying a daily task that you could develop some awareness around. So using that, either that list I gave you of daily tasks that you could try to cultivate greater awareness around, or your own. So of the people that are here this evening, would any of you who were able to attend to either of those things last week be willing to share about what you noticed this week in terms of any challenges that you met, how you dealt with those challenges? You know, what showed up for you as you worked with those practices, if you did spend any time with them this past week? And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just, what was your experience with them? And I'll just open the floor to whoever wants to respond.
As Matt, the hardest thing for me was not going back into autopilot, even while I was making the cognitive choice to, you know, do, okay, so for instance, shower. You know, normally I get in, soap up, shave, shampoo, done. Went in reverse order, and then the next morning when I got in, I caught myself just going straight to soap. I'm like, wait, nope, hold on, come on, nope, let's go back, let's do shampoo, shave, and then soap. I also tried to do it with emptying the dishwasher. You know, instead of starting on the bottom rack and going plates, silverware, and then top rack cups, I was going in reverse order, just to try and be more aware. But again, I caught myself going back to the old habit routine.
Well, and it's great that you even noticed that. I mean, I think those are great observations, that you were able to catch yourself and to just be able to see how easy that is to just slip. It is such a slippery slope. It happens so quickly. It's so automatic. And I think being able to see that can provide great insight. Were there any other things that you noticed about kind of shaking it up a little bit? Were there any other things that you were able to notice?
Not that I noticed. Quite honestly,
Okay.
I didn't know what to look for.
Okay.
I guess if anything, I was just more. Maybe it felt like it took longer, just because I was more present.
So it kind of slowed time down a little bit for you.
Yeah, I guess that'd be the really the only thing I noticed is it felt like it took longer, kind of slowed things down for me.
Okay. And were you able to notice any thoughts as you did this process? Any thoughts or emotions that emerged as you did it? As you
Nothing that stuck with me.
Okay.
Nothing that came out. Nothing more than just the usual what my mind does when I'm doing something else, anyways.
Okay. Any other observations about this last week that you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's been going really well for me. I've been struggling a lot. And the last week or two since we've started doing this has really just helped me. Before the webinar series started, like the very first one, it was, mindfulness, and everybody's talked about, let's be mindful and how to be mindful. And, oh, it's easy. You just be mindful. I'm like, what? But these have really helped break it down, put it into words I can understand, put it into practices I can understand and do. And it's really helped, I think. So I'm very appreciative to you guys and grateful for you guys doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity as well. I mean, I really appreciate Mike and Warriors Ascent's effort to really get this out in front of people, because it is very helpful. It can be very helpful to have these skill sets available to you, especially when you can get some training in them. Like, what does it look like? What does it feel like? How do I practice? What are the principles that I can start to lean into to kind of integrate this into my life? So I'm really glad to hear that it's been helpful to you. That's great. And I thank you for being open and sharing. Is there anyone else? Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who's willing to share this evening about this past week and working with the practices that we discussed last week?
Hello, it's Greg, and I just
Hi,
wanted
Greg.
to let you know that normally I'm quite a bit of a D-bag, and I believe the mindfulness is helping me slow down and be a little bit more pleasant to be around.
I'm really glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear that. What do you think? What difference do you think it's making for you? How do you feel it's helping you?
I like the slowing down. I believe that if I can slow down a little bit, and I did what Matt said about the shower, and that just it's a practice. And I've known about mindfulness for many years. It seemed like after deployment, I was less mindful, and something I've probably need to work on. So I want to thank you for encouraging me to get back into that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I hope that you can hold on to one of the pieces that can be really helpful to maintaining the practice is, remembering that component of kindness and friendliness towards ourselves. It's the practices of mindfulness are simple, but not necessarily easy. And I'm glad that when you can catch yourself and remind yourself I also encourage you to be friendly, to bring some kindness to yourself, and for everybody practicing, that how we orient towards ourselves is really critical to having continuity of practice, because it's really, I had this, I was reading today talking about, how to orient people towards learning mindfulness. And, if we kind of live our lives in a linear way in terms of time, like a line of time, these moments of mindfulness are like these lines that drop into these moments of time, that mindfulness is just this perpendicular line to this linear experience that we're having. And so what you may drop into in one moment in linear time can look quite different than another moment in linear time in terms of the cultivation of present moment awareness. So we may find that there are times in our practice where we're challenged. We show up and it's uncomfortable and it doesn't go well, and we're struggling with, internal, things that are happening internally that maybe don't feel good. But just the recognition that that's just a dropping in one moment, and that the truth is things are constantly shifting and changing in this linear experience that we're having, so that we just maintain, this continuity of practice, hopefully with kindness and friendliness as we kind of meet each of these moments, will keep us coming back, remembering to come back to the practice. So I thank you for sharing, and I'm glad it's helping. It looks like we have a couple more people on the call than when we started. Does anybody else want to share? Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else want to share before we move into tonight's practice? We have the time, so. All right, I'm going to take, go ahead.
I mean, just real fast, in terms of, we'll say, relaxing body scan, for me, sleeping, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, have all sorts of intrusive thoughts, and on one hand, I'm trying to, all right, hey, push them away. But I know your relaxing body scan, exercise, wherein you hold so much tension throughout your body. So you may be dismissive of your thoughts, but if you're holding in all this tension, that's that in and of itself is an issue. So for me, being able to relax, almost sequentially like that, I'll say has been somewhat of a game changer in terms of being able to kind of really see the I'll say the real source of tension in many ways that you don't tend to focus on. It's just kind of like in your body, and you hold it in without even realizing it. So that component, that that one tool of many that you showed us last week, I know I've tried to apply, and it's helped me. So
yeah, and knowing that when we meet struggle in one session, that's just one moment, that is one session, and it doesn't necessarily frame every experience thereafter, right? That this is one moment of practice. And it's good to be able to notice when we're being challenged, like when we're internally having struggles. It's good to be aware of that. So thank you very much. So I am going to shift. I'm going to turn on my presentation here for a moment. Did I do this right, Mike? I'm always questioning whether I've got this figured out. Can you see my presentation yet? Can you see it?
Yes, I can. Yep, okay. And we've got full screen, so it looks good.
Okay, so here we are on week 2. I just want to remind everybody, so our practice tonight is going to be awareness of breath. And I just want to remind everybody who was here last week about this idea, this concept of the window of tolerance, making sure that you are, as we're going through practice this evening and as you go through practices in the days to come, that you're maintaining an awareness, you're doing self-monitoring in relationship to the level of arousal in your body. So recognizing perhaps when hyperarousal shows up or hypoarousal shows up, And hopefully you'll remember how we talked about what those might feel like in the body. But basically, if there's too much energy in the body and you're moving into hypervigilance or moving into not having enough energy in the body and feeling frozen, that if those things start to show up as you're practicing, just know that you should consider modifying your practice, okay? And that can look like opening your eyes if they're closed, perhaps moving the focus of your attention as you're practicing, or perhaps bringing some movement into your practice, like stretching or something, or perhaps just disengaging from the practice, okay? So I just want to remind everybody of that. And our practice tonight is going to be awareness of breath. Now, the purpose of awareness of breath is, we're just basically, for this meditation, we'll be focusing on the felt sensation of the breath in the body. And the purpose of the focus on the breath is simply providing an object for our attention, okay? So I'll start off by saying if you find that working with the breath or noticing the breath, paying attention to the breath is a source of hyperarousal for you, so if it becomes a source of dysregulation for you, either as you're practicing this evening or in the days to come, that you can use another focus of attention. So instead of noticing the breath, another option would be to just listen to sound that's available to you in the space that you're in, or to bring awareness into sensations in the hands or the feet. So you can choose your focus of attention for this meditation practice. I'm going to guide you focusing on the breath, but other options that are available to you are sound. So just listening and being aware of sounds in the landscape that you're in, or bringing attention to felt sensations in the palms or the feet. And if you find as we begin practicing that as you're working with the breath, you feel like it's not a good anchor for you, you can just bring your awareness to another one of those anchors, okay, and make that the focus of your practice, okay? So I want to give you lots of flexibility, ability to self-care as we go through this guided meditation. But the whole point is to just provide an anchor for your attention. And as we practice together, your mind will undoubtedly wander, and just know that that's okay and that that's natural. And so I will, throughout the guided practice, gently remind you to notice where your attention is. And if you notice what's taken you away, then just bring yourself back, okay? So it's pretty straightforward, simple, as I said earlier, but not necessarily easy. And I want you to give yourself plenty of room to be kind and friendly to yourself. So if you find yourself getting caught up in judgments about how you're doing, whether you can or can't do it, any of that, just let those dialogues go and just bring yourself back to noticing whatever your focus of attention is, okay? So I've got my chimes here. Mike, could you do me a favor and just silence everybody else's microphone just so we don't have any feedback? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so getting comfortable and in a seated position. If it's more comfortable for you to lie down, you can do that as well. But ideally for this meditation, we want to be seated in a chair or on a cushion. Then I'll ring my chimes to begin and ring my chimes to end. So shutting down the eyes if that's comfortable for you. We'll begin by bringing our attention to the body sitting. Feeling points of contact with the chair or the floor beneath us. And if we're sitting with a sense of an upright or dignified posture, So allowing the spine to be long and lifted. Sitting with a sense of awakeness, alertness, but not with a sense of rigidity. So we want to make sure there's still some movement in the spine. But there is a sense of uplift out of the hips, through the spine and up through the head. Feeling the arms along the sides of the body, perhaps noticing points of contact that the hands make with the thighs, or perhaps the points of contact that the hands make with each other if they're cupped together. Just allowing ourselves to settle into the seated position, allowing the body to come to stillness. Allowing the floor beneath you to support you. Perhaps noticing pressure or temperature in the room, the sense of air moving about the room against the skin. Noticing the drape of clothing. Just taking a moment to scan briefly through the head and the face, seeing if there's any areas of tension that you might soften in the forehead or around the eyes, the temples, the cheeks and the jaw, the mouth. Just softening, seeing if there's any tension you can release or let go of. Feeling into the neck and shoulders. Noticing perhaps if the shoulders are lifted and just allowing them to drop away from the ears. Allowing the arms to be heavy like curtains. Feeling into the torso and the hips. And releasing any tension you feel. Seeing if there's anything you can let go of. And down through the legs. And down into the feet. Feeling grounded. And when you feel ready to do so, I'm going to invite you to bring your attention to the breath. Just feeling the breath cycling through the body. You may take a moment to notice the depth of the breath, if it's shallow or deep or somewhere in between. Whether it's fast or slow, somewhere in between. And just allowing things to be as they are. We don't have to change anything that's happening with the breath. Our practice here is just simply to notice ourselves breathing. Allowing the breath to cycle in and cycle out. Perhaps noticing their wave-like movement through the body. The body expanding to accept the inhale and contracting to exhale. And if you notice that the mind wanders away from this movement of the breath, just simply notice what took your attention and bring it back. Bring yourself back. Reestablish your attention on the breath. And if you notice any commentary of the mind, just allowing it to be there without getting hooked by it. Just letting it go. Knowing that it's just a thought. Coming back to the breath. And as you're ready to do so, I'm going to ask you to further refine your attention on the breath. So as the breath cycles through the body, take a moment to see if you can notice the breath in the belly or as the belly expands and contracts. And perhaps noticing the breath in the rib cage as the rib cage expands and contracts. Feeling the breath moving through the nose, perhaps at the nostrils or the upper lip, or the back of the nose or the throat. So as the breath cycles through, see if you can notice a vivid point of contact in that pathway that's most accessible to you. Sometimes it's the belly or the chest, the nose. Whatever's most alive and vivid for you as you breathe right now, seeing if you can further refine your attention to just notice that felt sensation, that vivid point of contact in the flow of the breath. So we're drawing that lens of attention in even further, narrowing it even further, making our seat of attention that felt sensation. And as you establish your anchor of attention at that point of felt sensation, see if you can see how long you can stay with the breath. See if you can stay with the breath from the moment it becomes an inhale, all the way through the arc of the inhale to the pause as it switches to become an exhale, to the pause as it switches to once again becoming the inhale. Just staying with the cycle, noticing beginning and middle and end of one cycle, the pause in the beginning and the middle and end of the next cycle. Staying with this as much as you can. And drawing the attention back when you get distracted. Just noticing where your mind tends to wander and bringing it back. So where is your mind in this moment? If it's drifted away, just notice where you went and come back. Reestablish your seat. Reestablish your attention. Perhaps recognizing that every time you notice that you've drifted away, that's actually a mindful moment. You are aware and present when you notice you've drifted. Then you can simply choose to come back, noticing as well that capacity to choose. And as you're ready, I'm going to invite you to once again expand this lens of attention. We've been focused on this felt sensation of the breath. And so now we're just going to expand our lens of attention to feel the full cycle of the breath just moving through the body. And further expanding the attention to include the body sitting. So once again, noticing points of contact that our body makes with the chair or with the floor. Feeling into whatever sensations are available to us in the body. Noticing the waves of breath. And perhaps taking a moment to just acknowledge the time you've taken and the effort you've brought to this practice this evening. Perhaps acknowledging the time you've taken to care for yourself and to be present with yourself just as you are. And as you're ready to do so, opening your eyes, and I'll invite you to first begin by just taking a couple of moments to just remind yourself of the space that you're in. Perhaps take a look around the room. Notice some objects or colors. Just bringing yourself back to here and now. So, Mike, I thought maybe we'd open up the mics again and see if anybody wants to share about what that was like for them. Mike, you're going to have to help me here because I don't know how to turn everybody's mic on. I'm sorry. Oh, I see. I see now.
Hi, this is Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Debbie.
Well, I will just say that after, this with the stress of life and the stress of work and the stress of family and all of that right now, it's just, I become mindful of the fact that it's really hard for me to get focused on myself, even for these basic things. And so I kept finding myself drifting and coming back and drifting and coming back. And so I just need to learn to take time to focus on myself and kind of use these as restorative kind of practices, because I need a lot of practice, I think.
We all do. We all do.
I don't know.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Of course.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
When you drifted away, where did you tend to go? And not in terms of detail, but like, what did you go into? The past or the future planning? What did you notice?
More just kind of those kind of stressful things of the day, kind of drifting off to those stressful things. So then if I could pull myself back and just, I could feel the whole focusing on the breath as kind of a calming thing, but I kept getting pulled away from that calm. So I think that just, the more you do this, the longer you're able to focus, I would assume, and stay in the moment. Is that?
Well, this particular practice, so any practice that has kind of an anchor of focus, so whether it's the breath or a felt sensation in the hands or feet or sound, anything that anchors you into something consistently is, yes, what it can help us start to do is have greater control over our attention. So there's two things really happening. Is every time you drift away, just know that that's absolutely natural. It's called the default mode. We all do it. Some of us do it to greater degrees than others, but most of us will move away from the object of attention pretty quickly. As we practice, we do start to settle. So there is a settling that will occur, and you'll have greater gaps without thinking, without the thoughts coming in, but they will still show up. They will still visit you. They'll never go away.
Okay. Thank you. I can feel it being so beneficial, and so I kept trying to pull myself back, and I guess just need to practice. Thank you.
Exactly. And just know that and I think I'm probably speaking to everybody here this evening. I'm sure if we could all raise our hands and agree with what you're experiencing, I think almost everybody could agree with the experience that you're having. So I want to say that it's not unusual. And just think about these moments as just dropping in. We're just dropping in, the mind floats away, we drop back in, and we can be really kind to ourselves in that process, just knowing that this is normal.
Okay.
And what we're learning to do is develop the ability to focus and have more control over that. And the beauty of doing formal practices like that is that as we do this here, as we take time in daily life to pause and drop in, that awareness will start to grow in the activities of our daily lives as well. So
Fantastic.
what we do on the cushion, so to say, starts to be reflected in our daily lives as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, and I encourage you to keep showing up and taking a seat. Anybody else want to share? Can anybody relate to what Debbie was sharing?
Yeah, Matt here. Yeah, I can. That's always been staying focused is challenging. You were asking, where does your mind typically go? For me, it really depends on what's going on. Like tonight, it went to future planning. What am I going to do when we get off here? Work stuff I got to finish up. But if I'm in a shameful mood, or feeling the shame, and it's it usually goes back to what's causing me to feel shame, the event that precipitated that, or the memory, or the intrusive thought. One thing that I have an issue with is when I lose my focus. Like tonight, I was losing focus because I can hear my wife talking out in the main room. One thing that's hard for me is not getting angry, and not letting the angry part of myself come out and scream at them, my family, just for having a conversation. Is there what would be a good way of keeping that anger from coming out and dealing with it without shoving it down? You know what I mean?
Yeah, anger is tricky. I have my own, I've had to work with my own anger in my adult life as well. I think in terms of distractions as you're practicing is to see if you can just allow them, rather than being caught up in interpretation or judgments around sound, see if you can just allow them to be part of the field of awareness, because distractions can be, being able to stay focused. They can actually help us develop our ability to stay focused. Like when we notice we're getting pulled away by what we're hearing, to simply like allow them to just be sounds passing through, to recognize that in a sense we're being hooked into something, and that we can unhook ourselves. Like there's some choice around that ability to unhook and come back to our practice. And that's just in terms of the distractions that we may experience in our environment, because the truth is distractions are just a part of the practice, and learning how to work with them is part of discernment and within practice, like noticing, coming back to our anchor. In terms of dealing with anger in general, that's kind of a larger question, and one that in my own life I'm still kind of working through, in terms of my tendency is to push down anger, and learning how to recognize the energy of anger without allowing it to turn into something externalized that isn't helpful, learning how to just notice the sensation, like where is the sensation of anger in my body? What does it feel like? Like if I were to describe anger as a sensation in my body, where is it? What are the qualities of it? What is the storyline associated with it? To really start to understand it. And then the question becomes, how do I work with it skillfully? And that's all a larger process, that's something that's really a skill set to build.
Okay.
So I guess
It's
it's
not an
something I'm
easy
still learning to understand. It's not an easy answer, and it's something I'm still working on myself. But one thing that I find helpful is to orient towards the sensation associated with the emotion. So if I notice anger arising, where is it in my body? Where do I feel it? Is it showing up as tension in my neck or in my jaw? Is there heat associated with it? Like, what is the felt sensation? And then what are the thoughts that start to emerge out of it, to like separate ourselves from them? Like, notice these are just thoughts, right? We get so wound up in what we're experiencing that we forget that we can really pull our cognition away from it a little bit. Like, we could pull ourselves, our awareness, away from the cognitive process and the felt process, so that we're not so wrapped up in it that we're reactive. But that's where mindfulness can help us, that staying present without getting pulled into the experience. Does that help at all?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I know it's not gonna solve the problem. It's not gonna solve it overnight, but it's something to work with. Like, where is this showing up for me? How do I feel this? And in terms of distraction, just seeing if we can allow the distraction to be there and just simply come back, like just to allow it to be part of the field of our environment.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share what that was like? Any challenges you met? Okay. I think I'm going to take that as my cue to move into a little bit of a presentation on perception and conditioning. So I'll move back into presentation mode here. Okay, so let's talk about perception here. So this image, I want you to take a look at this image. Oh, goodness gracious. And there's actually two images here. You may see the profile of a young woman that's looking away in the picture. So you may see a young woman's head turned away from us. Or you may see an image of an older woman, once again a profile, but like half of her face. And she's got a larger size nose and kind of a pointy chin. So one, just notice what you see when you look at this. Do you see a younger woman or an older woman, or can you see both? And if you can see neither, I don't know what to say. But hopefully you see one or the other or both, if you can see both. And this is just a visual representation of perception. I mean, the intent here is not that you see one or the other or both, but just to give you a sense of how the way we see things, the way we interpret what's happening is largely determined by perception. And our perceptions are unique to each of us. And our perceptions are often based on how we think. Okay, our thinking plays a significant role in how we perceive what's happening. It interprets how we see others. Our thoughts interpret how the world is, how we see ourselves, what we think is possible or achievable, the beliefs that we carry. And our confidence in our ability to be reactive or responsive in the world are largely determined by the thoughts that we carry, which often determine how we perceive ourselves in the world. It's how we interpret our experiences. Perception helps us interpret what's happening. And often our perceptions are influenced by our past experiences. So our histories, you could In some cases, it may be our baggage, the things that we've carried with us through our lives play a significant role in how we see and hence how we perceive. Okay, so how we interpret what's happening is largely determined by the past experiences we have. And neuroscience, today's field of neuroscience, believes that experience plays a significant role in how our brain is structured and how it functions, and ultimately how those things influence how we interpret the world. So the experiences we've had and the environments we've been in the past can play a significant role in how we interpret things are today. So one of the things that we're learning through learning the skills of mindfulness is to bring some greater awareness to the thought patterns that we have, that we live our lives with, and how they influence how we're showing up, how we're perceiving the world, how we're perceiving other people, and using that awareness to recognize that the perceptions that we're often carrying around are not entirely accurate. Our perceptions in many cases will influence our motivation, which will influence our choices, which will ultimately influence our emotions and our behavior, right? So having some understanding about the lenses that we're looking through can be very helpful in terms of recognizing how we're showing up, how they're influencing us, how they're influencing our behavior. And oftentimes, our thoughts will lead us towards behaviors that can be quite reactive. So when we can start to kind of get a greater understanding of our thinking processes, we also have the opportunity to potentially make different choices. Okay. So I just want to point to some research that kind of speaks to the role of perception. And I'll begin by, as I point to these two kind of studies on perception and their outcomes, I just want to make sure I'm making clear that, these are correlational studies. So what they're suggesting is there are relationships present in their research. They're not necessarily saying that A produces B. So I just want to be really clear. What these studies suggest is there's relationships in terms of how we perceive and how certain outcomes show up, okay? So the first one I want to point to is the work of Dr. Martin Seligman. He's really kind of the founder of the field of what we refer to as positive psychology. And he did some research with patients who were being treated for cancer. And he was looking specifically at their attributional style with regard to optimism and pessimism. And what he noticed is that patients who were optimistic tended to not necessarily blame themselves for their diagnosis, whereas pessimists tended to have a stronger sense of blaming themselves for their illnesses. Optimists tended to see their illness as just kind of a momentary setback in their lives, where pessimists tend to perceive their diagnosis as having more like long-term consequences. And optimists tend to see their diagnosis as having specific consequences to their lives, whereas pessimists tended to have a more global attribution to the effects of cancer on their lives. And what he did was looked at these two groups, these two attributional styles, over the course of treatment and after treatment for cancer. And what he found is that people who were more optimistic tended to have better outcomes than people who were more pessimistic. Now, I want to point to, again, the fact that this is correlational data. It's not suggesting that optimism means you will have greater outcomes with cancer. It's just suggesting that there may be some relationship between having a more optimistic point of view and being able to navigate a diagnosis of cancer. Additionally, Dr. Suzanne Kobasa did some research on stress hardiness, and what she was looking at was people who were working in high stress professions. I think one of the groups she looked at were taxi cab drivers who were working in London and who had really challenging street navigations that they had to navigate through in their work life. And what she wanted to know is, what made some cab drivers more resilient, or, she referred to it as stress hardiness, who were, what were the qualities of a cab driver who was more resilient than one of their colleagues who was less resilient in terms of their ability to manage the stress of driving through these streets of London. And what she found were there were kind of 3 characteristics with the people who were stress hardy. They tended to have a kind of stronger sense of themselves and their abilities. They also put their best effort forward, and they saw challenge as a natural element of life. So they weren't like dissuaded by challenge. They were actually, they actually saw it as kind of a natural part of being alive. And so the people who kind of held these characteristics tended to handle stress better than those who had different characteristics. So once again, just both of these studies kind of pointing to the fact that how we perceive and orient towards what we're experiencing can have some impact on outcome. Now that, once again, this is just correlation, that there may be some relationship here, that, how we interpret and how we orient towards what we're experiencing can potentially have some impact on how we respond to both difficulty and challenge. Okay. So as part of the homework for this next week, we're going to take a challenge and work with it and pay attention to how we respond to it. So you'll see, hopefully on your screen right now, something called the 9-dot exercise. And it's in the packet that you have available to you this week. And so on a sheet of paper in your packet, you're going to see one page that has 9 dots on it. And the challenge is to connect all 9 dots using exactly 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or pencil off the paper and without retracing any line. Okay, so that is an exercise that will be available in your packet this next week to work with. And the idea is just to notice how you approach that challenge, to notice thoughts that show up, notice how much you want to participate in the activity, how much you engage it, and to play with it, to bring some curiosity to it, and just to notice how you orient towards it. Okay, so it's not about getting the right answer. Okay, it's just about being with that practice and noticing what you notice to bring awareness to trying to solve the 9-dot problem. Okay, and using that as a source of information. Okay, are there any questions about what I presented or the exercise?
Amy, let me just point something out. You've got the handouts. If you've not already seen them, you have 3 of them. So you'll have the slides that Amy showed to include that 9-dot exercise, and then a PDF of 30-minute body scan, MP3. that has the URL. So the things that she's speaking to, you can just download off your handouts.
Right. So between now and next week, I'm going to encourage you to work with the MP3 file of the awareness of breath practice. And I'm going to encourage you to do the 9-dot practice. And just notice what it's like to work with both of those. And then next week, we'll meet again and we'll start off our time together talking about what you experienced.
One last thing, I may have uploaded the wrong, I've got the 30-minute body scan MP3. So I'll send that out to everybody. So I think I uploaded the wrong URL.
Okay. Okay. We'll get you the right one. Yeah, everything else is there. So we'll get that figured out. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now for you. Okay. Well, we are at 8:01, which means we're wrapping up for this evening. So next week we'll be practicing with thoughts and feelings, and I'm spacing on the other part of that. Oh, stress. Working with stress. So that will be our focus next week. We'll be here once again on Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. And in the meantime, I do hope you get an opportunity to practice with the meditation and the 9-dot exercise. And that's it for this evening. So I thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up and practicing with us and for your engagement.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Mike.
Absolutely. Amy, thanks so
you.
much. Everyone, thanks. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Amy.
Good night.